What up, Tate Schoolers? Welcome to another great episode of Tate School of Fitness Corner Podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Mr. Shane Sims. He runs a nonprofit and other things. I'm going to let him talk about it. I'm not going to even try to. Very busy man. But we're going to sit and hear how he got started, what keeps him going, and just all the great things that he's doing in the Athens community. What's going on today, bro?
Not a whole lot, just enjoying life, bro.
Good. I want to start by, first off, could we get a little bit about your background story? What got you into what you're doing now?
Yes, sir. And there's an old saying that I have that adversity breeds the best part of life. None of us want to go through adversity. And I think it's kind of pretentious to even say that I want to go through adversity so I can get better. However, sometimes it happens, and it's just a matter of what you do with it. Mm-hmm. For myself, mine started back when I was young, probably about 7 or 8 years old. That was around the time when drugs entered my household. Mm-hmm. My parents became addicted to crack cocaine. They were introduced to it by an uncle. And their addiction progressed, and by the time I got to maybe about my preteens, it had all but decimated our home, our household. Wow. And for me, probably the most devastating thing that happened during that period was me happening upon my parents doing the drugs and crack cocaine. Mm-hmm. And I remember the night that it happened, and it destroyed me. I couldn't articulate it that way then, but of course, in hindsight, I saw that it really tore down my belief in anything established, any authority figure, because my parents, they were my heroes. Mm-hmm. And that started a spiral for myself. Shortly thereafter, I began to hang in the streets of Athens-Clarke County. And by the age of 13, I was a father, I was doing marijuana, I was drinking alcohol, and on the road to destruction for the most part. I had a totally different social network by that time, of course, and again, just looking back, what I realized is that I was looking for acceptance. I had lost a lot that night, and I was constantly searching for something and someone to replace it. And of course, I never found it where I was looking, which meant that I went deeper into the streets of Athens-Clarke County. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I still managed to do okay in school, to fight my way through school, and it was a fight. Because as my parents' addiction progressed, it came to a point where I ended up getting summer jobs, and then as I got older, real jobs to support myself and my younger brother. But in the streets of Athens-Clarke County, nothing stays the same. You either get out or it gets worse. Yeah. And I fought my way through school. In my senior year in high school, and I just came to that crossroads where I had to make a decision about my life. And then, unfortunately, during that time, I made one of the most fatal decisions of my life. And I made a decision to participate in an armed robbery. And with me, it wasn't about money per se. It wasn't even about the lifestyle. Throughout my struggles, I still managed to maintain employment. Of course, that for me, it was a matter of social life or death. Yeah. And the job that I worked at the age of 18, The Best Foods, it closed all of a sudden. The owner, he didn't give us any warning. It's like myself and a few other teenagers came to work, and he was like, well, I hate to say, but I'm closing the doors. And for me, it was panic mode. For most of my coworkers, it was just like, okay, I can't buy Jordans this year, Yeah. And at that same time, I re-met some peers that I had known early on in grade school. And all of them were into various criminal activities. Although I was in the street, I still maintained something of a balance. But for them, they were all into robbery. They were all into the hard drugs. And when we met, it was just like a match made in hell. I had a need for a job, and they had a way of getting money. Yeah. And they came to stay with me in my apartment. And I remember when one of the guys first mentioned armed robbery as a possibility of getting money. Because at this time, I had a child to take care of as well. And when he first suggested it, it was just like, no, I mean, I'm out here, but I'm not in this like that. Yeah. And so, but as I say, association breeds assimilation. And eventually, after hearing this same idea for about a couple of weeks, one evening, man, it just got to the point where I had to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And by that time, they had presented it to me as being, just harmless. Go in, get the money, and it happens in the movies all the time.
Yeah.
They get out, and so I agreed. We got in my car. I went to my parents' house and got my dad's shotgun. Of course, they had access to nothing. A couple of them did drugs with their parent or with their father. And so they were, for the most part, homeless. So all structure they had in their life really came from me. And and I allowed, I'm not going to say they did, I allowed my structure to be exploited. And I got the gun and we went to rob the Golden Pantry. And by the end of the night, the store clerk was dead. We went in and initially it went off, like in the movies. Went in, the store clerk was, no resistance whatsoever. And it's ironic because when I think back, one scene that I remember is I was at the cash register, hitting the cash tender button on the cash register. Of course, they didn't know how to do it. None of them ever had a job. Yeah. And so I hear this loud just bang, and I turned around, and one of my co-defendants was behind me. He had punched the camera off the wall. And so I remember asking him, "Why'd you do that?" Yeah. And he just kind of looked. So for me, it was like, that was like the beginning of the end, as far as my realization. And so we left out of the store, and the guy that had the gun, the co-defendant had the gun, for some reason he shot the clerk. And the robbery had been complete. We were out of the store. We were back to my car, and I remember hearing the gunshot and hearing the clerk scream. And we got back in the car. And as I was driving, I remember about a mile down the road, I turned to him, I was like, part of my language, like, "Man, what the hell did you shoot him for?" Yeah. And he really had no explanation. Ultimately, I turned myself in, admitted to my role in the crime, and just like, a man had died. Yeah. So all the fun was gone. And, I was sentenced to life plus 15 years in prison. Wow. And I entered the prison system at the age of 18 in 1996 with the determination that my life was going to be an atonement for what I had done. I didn't think I would ever get out of prison with life plus 15 years, so I knew that the value of my life would depend upon what I put into it day by day. And this is where my early childhood rearing came up, because I do come from a religious family. And my parents, even with their addiction, they were Christians. And my dad especially was very much, he was about morals and values, even in his addiction. And these were the things that I returned to. And what I quickly learned in prison, that most of the guys didn't even know who their fathers were. And at least by this time, my father and mother had come out of the addiction. I was able to restore my relationship with him within that first year or so. And so I knew what a father-son relationship was. I knew what it was to have a man in the house that you can look up to, as I said, even in his addiction. And so I became sort of like a young father figure for a lot of men, several of whom were older than myself. And that was significant because eventually I developed a reputation. And eventually the administration began to pay attention. And one officer, she later on became a warden. I remember one day she told me, she was like, what I'm gonna call you? I'm gonna call you Counselor Sims. She's like, she's like, every time I see you, you're talking to someone or you're listening to someone, but she told me to keep doing that. Fast forwarded 17 years in incarceration, the reputation had pretty much spread throughout the prison system, and ultimately 3 different prison wardens petitioned the parole board for my release. And their reason was basically he's of much more use to us out there, meaning society, than in here. And after serving 20 years on February 3rd, 2016, I was released and I came home. And I had already developed kind of this, I guess you say, habit of empathy, because I know how easy it is to go from a normal life to completely abnormal, going from stability to having no stability. And these traumatic experiences can happen to anybody. Yeah. And so for me coming back home, I did what I had done all those years. I talked to people, I listened, and ultimately Athens-Clarke County government took notice. And I began to teach classes at the Clarke County Police Department on citizen police community police relations. And after teaching a couple of these classes, the chief noticed and offered me a position as a chaplain with the Athens-Clarke County Police Department. And that was kind of my segue into the social scene here in Athens. Shortly thereafter, I was drafted into the mayor's youth game task force. So began to kind of give my advice, as they call it professional advice, but for me, just lived experience on how should we interpret what we're seeing with our youth and how it should be addressed. And so from there, I began to do motivational speaking, and then ultimately I went to training for substance use rehabilitation training. It's called CARE, Certified Addiction Recovery Empowerment Specialist. And after that, I began to work in the field of recovery. And so today I direct the nonprofit People Living in Recovery. I'm the executive director. I'm also co-owner and co-director of Modern Pathways to Recovery, which is recovery housing for men. I'm a motivational speaker, and I also was able to start a small business, Real Solution Mobile Detailing. Initially, the intent was to give employment opportunity to troubled youth. This kind of grown into its own thing now. And so that's how I got to where I'm at. You know, it's like God favored me, so I paid it forward.
Yeah, because and I want to ask you, like in the beginning, when you got out and you, because I know I'm pretty sure it wasn't easy to just say, "Oh, I'm getting out, I'm speaking.
Sure.
Let's just do this. I'm going to be successful." What was it like when you stepped out in 2016?
Sure.
Because I know so much changed. Because it was 96.
Yeah.
Like, so how was that? Like technology, and not saying that you wasn't exposed, but still though, that's a long time to be away from society. So how was it when you first came out of 2016?
I think most guys struggle with the desocialization process that happened in prison. I was fortunate. I would say out of my 20 years, probably 10 to 12 of those years was spent working in administration. So I worked in administrative buildings. And so my day-to-day activity didn't consist of just chain gang conversations. You know, I was able to stay socialized.
Good.
And working in administration, you're not around officers per se, you're around secretaries and, you know, all what we call free world people that they were in the system, not necessarily part of the system.
Okay.
And so having these conversations with these people, majority women, it kept me acclimated. It kept me where I was able to socialize. And then, of course, when cell phones came into the prison, I made the conscious choice that I was going to keep communication with my family, you know, no matter the risk, because the phone calls were so expensive. That unless you're wealthy, you know, you just could not do that. And so once the smartphones came in, I made it a point to learn how they work, you know, how technology was advanced. And so I think from a technological perspective, having a smartphone for about 7 years prior to me getting out, it kind of made me aware of what was going on out here. And then being able to work around people that were they were administrative but not prison minded, it kept me in tune socially. So when I came out, I mean, I got my license like the first week I was out. You know, I hadn't driven in 20 years. So it was, for me, it was easy. Going to big stores like Walmart, which is usually intimidation for a lot of guys, for me, it was easy, you know, and I'm grateful. And I tell people all the time, I'm not the rule, I'm an exception, because most people are not fortunate enough to have those experiences in prison that I did. But for me, I thank God, man, the transition was relatively easy.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful, because again, like we were speaking earlier off camera, I had a lot of friends, childhood friends who they did time and they come home and they had to adjust to even just talking and not looking around 24/7, worry about somebody trying to attack them. It just was very, it was weird to me because I'd never been incarcerated, but it just, I don't know, it's like, it's a whole nother world. Now, of course, I know you can speak on that, but it's just like it was a whole nother world, and they was so lost in the beginning. And then probably about 6 months to a year, then they kind of caught up with things. But for that time period, they wouldn't go anywhere. They wouldn't go. They were just at the house around totally people that they truly, truly trust. And if they didn't, they wouldn't even talk to you. You know. So that's definitely, you was very fortunate and blessed to be able to have that experience while you was serving your time. So when you came out, because again, that wasn't even that long ago. That's 5 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so much you have accomplished in 5 years. You talked about the CARE. What was the certification?
Sure.
What was that like? Like, did somebody say, "Oh, this is what you need to do"? Or you was like you researched it and you just how did that come
Good
about?
question. Good question. Most cities have what's called DRT, day reporting centers, and they work in conjunction with probation and parole. And this is where instead of people being sentenced back to prison, they go through this program where they come daily to take classes. They have to get jobs, take drug screens. And I was asked by the director of our DRC here in Athens, Georgia, to speak to a graduating class, to speak for graduation. And he had heard about my story. And of course, by that time, that's what I did. I was transparent about who I am, what I've been through. And so after the graduation, there was so much engagement between myself and the participants that he was like, I want you to come work here. And that's a big thing for Georgia, and ex-convict working with a state office. But he told me about the CARES certificate, CARES training. He's like, this CARES training is only for individuals with lived experience. So you can't go to CARES unless you've been in prison or unless you battle with substance use disorder. And he said, if you go through this training and get certified, I can hire you on as what's called a peer specialist, as an individual that's trained but also have lived experience. And so I took that seriously, and I did. About a month later, I went through the training, and when I graduated, I came back home, and I called him and said, I'm done with the training, so it's okay, cool. The same day that I called him, I got another call from another organization, which is People Living in Recovery. I work now, and the director, she said, you've completed your CARES training. I said, yes, ma'am. So she was like, you're gonna go work at the DRC, and they're gonna pay you X amount. I said, yes, ma'am. She said, I'll give you.
I'll take care of you. Don't even worry about that.
And it was like, and to actually direct an organization that deals directly with individuals seeking recovery or returning citizens, for me, that was the ideal job versus being a part of the State Department to kind of assist them. Not that I was against it, but I'm a very loyal person. So I did initially say, hold on, let me check back with my original reason for going through this. And when I called the director of the DRC, he was like, look, man, he said, you're rebuilding your life. He said, you're going to be good at what you do no matter where you are. He said, take the job and we'll stay in touch. And so that freed me. And I came on at People Live in Recovery as a recovery coach or as an outreach coordinator. One of my jobs was to expand the organization's capacity, make connections. But due to some unfortunate turns of the event, I was asked by the board of directors to become the executive director of the organization about 6 months later. And so I've directed the organization since 2018.
Wow. So, yeah, it's just amazing because, again, like I say, it's 5 years, and I hear people who been working on their dreams, as they say, for years, and they definitely was not incarcerated. They're free, and they still haven't done anything. So that, to me, I'm impressed by that, because I didn't ask that off camera, when did you come home? But now realizing it's been 5 years and they've done so much. And I'm pretty sure you done helped so many people.
I would like to think so.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. I mean, because it's just a simple fact, like say you lived it. It's different when you have somebody who actually lived it.
Yes, sir.
Talking to you than somebody who just, saw it in a movie or read a book or two. But there's somebody who walked that walk and been through that experience, good or bad, is helpful just to hear your story. So I'm pretty sure people here listening to this now just, if you're around our age, period, the 80s affected all of us.
Right.
Some way, some form. I don't care if you was middle class, upper class, blah. The 80s was a beast.
Yes.
Period. Bottom line, for the black community, it definitely was a beast. We're still recovering from that. And it's 2021. And people who, you can't deny that, because, again, I grew up around people who their entire family was smoking. The first time I saw my first crack pipe, I was 11 years old. Right. I was supposed to be looking at nothing like that. But it was so common, because before that, people were just sniffing cocaine, like how people smoke weed now. So it's like, it's the things that we all witness, and in our lifetime is just amazing, from technology to drugs to whatever. We have been this age group, and I'm talking about that people who was either born in the 80s or grew up in the 80s.
Right.
We have experienced so much,
Yes,
and you kind of take that for granted. You know, that's why we're survivors, because I'm pretty sure somebody in your family was doing it. You know, like, you can't avoid it and say, oh no, we was drug free. I promise you. You just didn't know. You know, maybe your uncle went off to camp. He was really in recovery. You just didn't know because you was a child. Because it really is. That was a pandemic.
It was,
like, seriously, that was seriously a pandemic. And for you to, you know, unfortunately, but fortunately for the people that you helped, that you experienced that just blown away by how much you have done in the 5 years. And being a director of your nonprofit, I have a friend who has a nonprofit, and I hear her headaches sometimes. So I have to ask you, like, what are some of the things that you had to get adjusted to by being a director?
Everything.
Okay.
When I came into the position, we had lost one of our major grants. The second grant ran out the first month that I was executive director.
Wow.
There was an ongoing audit, and at that point during the audit, it was determined that several thousands of dollars were unaccounted for. So our main funding agency was pretty much reluctant to renew funding.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had 3 employees, and my everyday drive was to create a space for them to do what they love to do as they did, and to get paid. Every day I had the weight on my shoulder of figuring out how to navigate these waters with very little to no experience as executive director,
Mm-hmm.
and to not only restore funding, but also to rebrand the organization and to increase upon this capacity. So the biggest challenge I ran into is just out here, people exist in silos. You know, you would think that people would come to the assistance of good, but what I quickly learned out here is that people anticipate others' failures. And
Yes.
I'm not a pessimist by no stretch of the imagination, but my own personal observation is that people are hurting so bad out here, and they have no idea how to make themselves better, how to make themselves feel better, that the only default they have is to look at someone that's doing a little bit worse and get just a little moment of reprieve by saying, at least I'm not that person.
Yep.
And I saw that I became that object, that person, for a lot of people and even organizations within my circle. And so I did a lot of praying, a lot of Googling, a lot of YouTubing, a lot of calling the IRS to figure out, what are these taxes? You know, if these taxes were not paid, how do I reconcile them? And a lot of talking to people who were willing to help that was totally unrelated to what I was doing. And so the biggest challenge that I ran into is that the nonprofit world here in Athens, there are silos. I mean, just honestly, and me learning what I needed to learn to move forward, it was difficult. But the experience came at a high price, but I learned, and we went 1 whole month without getting paid, period. You know, and I told staff that if they had to go elsewhere to get jobs until if and when we retained funding, they were fine, but everyone was like, we're doing what we love.
Oh, nice.
And, you know, everyone stayed, man. There was some loss, you know, loss of vehicles, loss of living arrangement, but the funding agency saw our efforts. They saw the resilience, they saw the progress, and they made a personal visit to our establishment from Atlanta and was like, you know what, we're gonna give y'all another chance. And so today, not only did we retain funding, but we've expanded it to quite a few other grants, and we've rebranded ourselves. And so now people living in recovery, PLR, as people know, we're forced to be reckoned with. You know, in our community and surrounding communities. And I always say that it's because God favored us because of our dedication and sincerity.
And one thing you educated me on before we started this was the simple fact that Athens is the capital of recovery in Georgia right now?
Yes, sir. Athens is considered to be the capital of recovery in Georgia.
Wow.
Yes, sir. Because of all the recovery resources that are here.
That's big. Again, it's unfortunate, but it's still fortunate. Like, you don't want people to have to be in recovery, but the fact that you have the resources here to accommodate those, because again, it's so much going on, and it's not just we say drugs, but it's alcohol and other things, right? That you do. So, with your nonprofit, what all do you treat as far as recovery?
Substance use, mental health, and homeless disorder, and we place all three of them on par.
Okay.
Because all three can be considered as chronic condition or chronic illnesses.
And it's funny because people outside, and I was telling you earlier, I'm finishing up my psychology work, but people who are not in this field don't understand that homelessness is a disease.
Sure.
You know, they don't think about that. They're just like, oh, they choose to be homeless or this, that. No, it's a disease because, you know, it's chronic with individuals. They have to, it's like anything else, they have to find a way to treat that because it's addiction somewhat. I hope I'm using the correct terminology here, but it's like an addiction, the fact that, you know, the how they live, you know, they don't, this may not be what they want. Now some do, but I know I had someone who, I used to work at a hospital in Atlanta, not called the name, very popular hospital, and we had people who would come in and they'd just come in to shower, eat, you know, maybe get a couple supplies, but then they're right back out there. They wouldn't even talk to you about placement. They're just like, nah, let me get my field.
And one of the things that I learned in incarceration is that I was kind of an anomaly in prison. I wasn't on the mental health caseload. You know, I did come from something of a family structure and had something of a foundation. But once I began to work, particularly in the commissary, where you kind of privy to information about people, what I learned is that you have in prison probably about 80 to 85% have mental health challenges, and that was telling to me. You know, especially after I had done several years and kind of became acclimated and knew what to look for to identify patterns. Because for me, I'm a big reader, I'm an avid reader, and I tried to understand what's going on. And the pattern that I saw is that majority of the men that I ran across in prison had mental health challenges. And now working in the field of addiction and recovery, you know, I challenge anyone that says that addiction or even homelessness is a matter of choice. It is not, because what we deal with in the field of addiction is dual diagnosis a lot, and that's individuals that have substance use disorder as well as mental health challenges. And a lot of people think that, okay, you're homeless because of your choice. No, most people are homeless and most people are addicted to narcotics or even alcohol because of untreated mental health conditions. And when you look at Georgia through the late 90s, the early 2000s, the mental health treatment infrastructure was decimated. And so people were turned out of these homes, particularly like in Milledgeville. They were turned out of these treatment facilities, treatment homes, and left to fend for themselves on the street. And just by default, if I have a mental health disorder, then I look for the more immediate relief. You know, I don't have that clinical relief anymore. And of course, you're looking for immediate relief. I'm selling drugs. It's a match made in hell again. And so there you have addiction starts. And if these individuals manage to have housing, then eventually addiction is going to take that housing. And this happens not just to individuals in the streets that you see, but also people that were established that had mental health conditions that went untreated because maybe insurance wasn't covering it, or maybe just the help wasn't there. And even that depression or that manic disorder took over. And before you know it, they couldn't function anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And because even at this same hospital, well, a hospital I had worked at before, I'd never forget that this family, their mother was suffering from mental illness. And they just left her on the sidewalk in a gown. Because they knew we had to take her in. Just left her right there. And it broke. That was one of the saddest things I ever witnessed in my time working in the ERs. But I thought about it. I was like, well, it's nowhere for her to get help because the funding is cut when it comes to mental health, especially in Georgia, like you said. So where are they going to go get help? Because they know we have to find somewhere. At least they know that she's going to have somewhere to stay for a little bit till she get placed. And usually when they get placed, it's somewhere totally in a whole other city. You know, so how is that going to help them? You know, because now you're being displaced from your family and your routine. You know, even if your family may feel like you don't know what's going on, they do know something in there.
Sure.
So it just is very sad. So that's another thing, a misconception about criminals.
Right.
We'll say they're just bad seeds. No, they probably have some things going on, and especially when you dig into their background, their childhood, and things because it can happen quick. Like you say, you can go from a so-called normal life into just what is going on, chaos. You know. So that's you're definitely correct about people saying that, oh, they choose to live this way. No, they may not have a choice because they don't have the tools to help them.
There you go.
You know. So at your center, because you say you're expanded now. So what are the positions? What are the positions at your? Do you have a psychologist on staff? Like what is the makeup of your staff?
Yes, sir. Staff are all individuals with lived experience. So we're a peer-led organization, which means that we work hand in hand with the clinical approach.
Okay.
And the reason that my organization is designated as an RCO, Recovery Community Organization, and it was born after SAMHSA, which is the National Organization on Substance Use and Mental Health, did a study to find out why so many people were going into recovery but were relapsing. And what they found out is that there was kind of a scale, and that individuals can successfully complete clinical treatment, but if they don't continue to receive their support, if they have only 1 to 12 months in recovery, there's only 33% chance that they will maintain their sobriety, because recovery consists of not just cognitive readjustments, but different experiences in your social environment that reacclimate you to life. And without those positive experiences to support whatever cognitive treatment you've had, then we're creatures of habit. You're going to default back to what you become accustomed to. And then they found that, SAMHSA found that if they were able to maintain recovery from 12 to 24 months, it increased a bit to 66% chance. Then they found up to 36 months, there was an 88% chance that they would never go back to substance use or alcoholism. And so what SAMHSA determined was that we need organizations on the ground that are led by individuals with lived experience that has the capacity to support individuals beyond the usual 12 to 19 months of the clinical approach. And so money was put into there, I think 13 to 16 organizations across Georgia called RCOs. So this is what we do. So there are 2 recovery coaches on staff. Both are individual. This position is filled by individual with lived experience and also substance use recovery training. There's 1 outreach coordinator, and then there's myself as the executive director.
Yeah, it makes more sense. Again, like I said, for somebody actually who's been through it to be more helpful, not negating other ones who haven't, but usually I'm pretty sure the success rate has to be for people who've been through it, because you understand. You know, you speak the same language. With your organization, because I love what you're doing, and I do want to talk about your business as well, your outside business. But the recovery home for men. How did that spark?
Well, for me, one of the main things that I saw is that although recovery is available in Athens, it's extremely expensive. Unless you live in a certain bracket or have the parents that can afford it. Although there are all these resources here, for the most part, it remain out of reach. And so for me, I began to think that one of the things that we need is in-house treatment, recovery housing for individuals that can afford it or to make it affordable. And initially I attempted to establish recovery housing through the organization. Had a conversation with the gentleman at the zoning department, and he was like, well, no, where your organization is located, you can't do in-house. And just kind of as a sidebar, about 3 or 4 months later, we left that office space to rent another, and another organization moved into our office space. It was directed by some white guys at church in Athens, and they went to the zoning office and they got permission to house people.
Oh wow!
So I leave whoever hears this to their own to decide what happened there. But it was clearly articulated that this is what we wanted to do. This is why. This is who we are. We were denied. This other organization came in, and it was just like right off. So my dad and I began to talk about doing recovery housing. outside of the establishment, going on our own and doing it. And so this conversation went on for a while, and then eventually I was like, man, it has to be done. And the stars aligned, so to speak. Another friend of mine and I, named Edmund Patterson, we actually partnered on an opportunity to lease a couple of condos and turn to recovery housing. And so because he was already in the recovery community, he was just a more fit partner at that time. And my dad is kind of in the background, on the wings, like, if you need me, let me know. But we met a guy that had just bought 4 condos in Comer, Georgia. And he was a guy in long-term recovery himself, a vet, and got an excellent deal on one of these condos. And he called me one day. He was like, a couple of people told me to get in contact with you because of the work you're doing. This is what I have. What are your ideas? And it was just like, I got something in mind. And so when we told him about recovery housing, he said, perfect. He said, the goal is ultimately, I want y'all to get all 4 of the condos. And we started recovery housing in February. And we take on individuals. We deal probably about 80-85% with the homeless population. So we allow them to enter treatment without any money. We give them job placement and allow them to kind of work backwards to pay down their arrears. And we made our weekly program fees, which are traditionally high, upward of $200. We made it inexpensive enough or cheap enough for them to work, pay their weekly program fee, receive treatment, but also save. And the way we have it structured, within 11 to 12 months, they should leave our program after having saved between $11,000 to $13,000.
Oh, wow.
And well into their recovery. And so that's Modern Pathways to Recovery was born out of a desire on both mine and Edmund's behalf.
Wow, that's amazing, because a lot of individuals, they're not, they don't get that help. Sure. That is, wow, I'm blown away. that is amazing, the fact that they can also save money as well.
Yes, sir.
So to get them definitely ahead of the game when they come out. Yeah, that's smart, and it all worked out. Even one door closed. I'm a firm believer. I don't. It's no such thing as no in a capitalistic country. Like people, if you make the move to somebody who's going to say, nah, come on in, let's try to make some money or whatever it is, because that's what this country is about. People don't like to say it, but it's the truth. Sure. I mean, it's just how it is. So I'm glad that it worked out for you. I mean, we sometimes as entrepreneurs, especially as Black entrepreneurs, we have to do so much more than most people, and it's unfortunate, but it's still. It makes us stronger and make us more. We adapt.
Yes, sir.
We have to adjust, and it just builds you further down the road.
Absolutely.
That's all it does. It just make you like, well, I already seen that. I already heard that no, and sure. I proved I got that yes. I created my own yes, right. So I'm not worried about it. Before I let you go, I definitely want to talk about the mobile solutions. So what started that as well?
The Real Solutions Mobile Detailing. It's that was a love child.
Okay.
Probably about 10 years before I even had any idea I would get out of prison. Back when I was dreaming and hoping, I remember talking to an associate of mine, I'll call him a friend, who had been a successful mobile detailer on the streets, very successful. And I got him to teach me the ins and outs. I always loved detailing, but he taught me the ins and outs. And I remember getting clippings from newspaper, because we couldn't have sales papers without getting officers to kind of leave their sales paper around. And I was able to price how much it would cost to start a mobile detailing business. And I remember putting that plan together, and I called it Sparkle Mobile Detailing, and I had it in a folder, and I put it in my locker. And that folder stayed in my locker for the next 10 years, and then the couple of years it took thereafter to actually get out. And so when I came home, that was one of my first goals, establish a mobile detailing business, not just for the sake of making money, but to give the youth some form of employment and to teach them some skill. Because once I learned it, I realized that this is a marketable skill.
Yeah.
And so I ended up naming it Real Solutions Mobile Detail, because I wanted to be a solutions to problem versus just a money making machine.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just grew it from that point. And then and I think one of the biggest booms for me was that because I was chaplain with the Athens-Clarke County Police Department, I was able to detail a couple of officers' cars and use it on my Facebook page. And so that kind of legitimized my efforts, and it's been going since then. So 5 years strong.
Wow, that's good, because 5 year mark is what every business want to get to. At 5 years, say, well, we're okay, we made it. So you again, so we go from nonprofit, the housing, and the mobile detailing business, all within 5 years.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Hey, y'all listening out there, man, y'all not doing enough. I'm just gonna say, you need to step your game up. You're not doing enough. 5 years, this man has 3 successful entities.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Proud of you, brother.
Thank you.
Proud of you, brother. That is amazing. Gotta ask about the COVID situation.
Sure.
Did the COVID situation affect you all last year?
Yeah. We I think my team, we developed a type of resiliency that can probably survive anything. And what we did is we changed up. We went virtual in our peer supportive individuals. Each one of us developed a phone check-in list, and we called every day. And then last but not least, we were like, we were frontline workers. So we continued to come to the office and open our doors. We kind of staggered our working schedule, so we weren't piled in on each other. But we kind of adjusted a little bit, and we kept right on, and we actually grew during COVID. And so, it was like, it wasn't even a bump in the road, I guess. It was kind of like, kind of a push to go a little bit faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's kind of what happened with us in Tate School of Fitness. It's just like, well, I was already mobile. I mean, not mobile. I was already virtual anyway. And so when it hit, it was just like, okay. Everybody was scrambling and trying to figure out a way to still continue their business. And I was like, well, you guys never heard of Zoom?
Yeah,
sure. You got your Zoom, you have Skype, you have FaceTime. Like, if you can do that, you need to go ahead and set that up. But it was the technology aspect that a lot of people, you'll be intimidated. Oh yeah, it intimidates a lot of people. It's not just, as people say, older people. It's a lot of people. It's just like, I don't mess with computers.
Right.
It's like the whole world is a computer. Like you have to catch on. So I'm glad that you still was able to get the services to the people that needed it, because I thought about that when it first hit, about the people who actually was in these services, in these spaces. How were they going to continue to get what they need? Because that's something that you can't just not do for a while.
Absolutely.
It's critical.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad you guys adjusted very quickly. I usually ask a question and say, what does health mean to you? But I'm not going to ask that question. I'm not going to, because I already know. From just hearing about the mental health aspect, taking care of yourself, and for you to survive 20 years, you had to have some kind of regimen.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
To just keep sanity.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to even ask that. I'm going to say that I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
And I wish you nothing but success. And I know people say this, let me know if I can help, but you have my number. We're going to help each other.
Thank you.
So you let me know what I can do.
Yes, sir.
Because I definitely want to be a part of what you do. Because it's not enough. It's not enough that going on, and there's definitely not enough people who look like us that are doing it and being successful.
Correct.
It's very, very low percentage, individual black men who are in spaces to counseling, teaching, and then speaking about this stuff. So again, very proud of you, and thank you. And if the people do want your services, all 3 of them, how could they contact you?
Easy email, shane.plrecovery@gmail. Shane, SHANE, dot P as in Paul, L as in love, and recovery@gmail.com. And I'm accessible, and I try to always return emails and calls in a timely fashion.
Well, thank you again, brother, for sitting down with us, and I wish you nothing but